Final Fantasy VII, along with Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, is one of those games that really defined gaming in the late 1990s, and is still looked upon with abject reverence today. With the remake trilogy close to wrapping up, I figured I should revisit the original game before diving into Remake and Rebirth, so that I can better appreciate, for good or for ill, the changes and additions that the remake games offer, as well as just revisiting this classic RPG with the benefit of age, as I last played this game 15 years ago when I was in college. My findings? It's a great game, but a lot of the reverence is admittedly due to nostalgia glasses. Final Fantasy VII, in addition to being the first game to appear on a competitor's system instead of a Nintendo console, also marked the series' shift to 3D. The story, put overly simplified, is about eco-terrorists waging a campaign against an oppressive and environmentally destructive corporatocracy. As events unfold and the plot progresses, you discover a planetary threat that is much greater than the Shinra Company, and you shift your quest from fighting the capitalist pigs to fighting a psychotic demigod intent on destroying the planet. It was a darker tone than previous Final Fantasy games, and a lot of that was down to the presentation. Midgar, the city where you start, is depicted as a dark, dirty urban sprawl of a city, and that dark and foreboding aesthetic really helps reinforce this idea that the Shinra Corporation is, if not inherently evil, at least maliciously apathetic and negligent. The game's graphics have not aged well, especially the pre-rendered backgrounds and heavily compressed video clips. But the music remains, in my opinion, the best of the series, and outside of Persona 4, I think Final Fantasy VII has the best video game soundtrack of all time. The battle theme, the title theme, and especially One Winged Angel are genuine OST classics. And even almost 30 years after the game's initial release, and 15 years after my first playthrough, One Winged Angel still gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. Final Fantasy has always had superb music, but Final Fantasy VII is in a league of its own. In terms of aging as a game from 1997 played in 2026, it hasn't aged well overall, but that's largely due to the visuals, and specifically an element of the visuals, and the performance, which I'll get into in a moment. I think the character models are just fine. I've never had an issue with the blocky, polygonal 3D models of the PS1, N64, and Saturn, and the character models here do highly benefit from the increase in resolution with the modern releases, but the blurry, heavily compressed video and the pre-rendered backgrounds that sometimes make it hard to see where you're supposed to go and what's a wall versus what's a ladder hinder the overall smoothness of the experience a lot more than I remembered. When talking about graphics and sound, I usually always mention performance too, and that's my big problem with the game, honestly. The modern releases, since nobody in the 1990s apparently bothered saving any game's source code, are emulated, so you get a more or less straight replica of the PS1 experience, just at a higher native resolution. That's great from the standpoint of experiencing the game authentically as the developers intended, but there are a lot of potential benefits from running old games on new hardware that you lose when you're using an emulation solution that you can't tweak and modify like you can a PC emulator. The big problem here isn't loading times, those aren't a problem at all, but the frame rate. A lot of the game runs at 15 frames per second. The combat takes place with a version of the active time battle system, so while it's not truly turn-based, it is close enough that the frame rate doesn't hinder your ability to play effectively, but it does feel very stuttery and just a bit off. I'm not sure why the decision was made to put the battle frame rate locked at 15 frames per second. The overworld and most exploration is at 30 frames per second, so it's not all bad news, but it does make that drop to 15 feel even more jarring than it otherwise would. Modern releases fortunately allow you to click in the left thumbstick to run the game at 3 times speed, which I did for most of my playthrough, and that does make the battle frame rate feel infinitely smoother. But the trade-off is that things happen a bit too fast, and you have a hard time seeing what attack or spell an enemy used, or how effective your attack was. Revisiting Final Fantasy VII was a strange experience for me. In my head, it sits on this pedestal of JRPG divinity. But when I replayed it 29 years after it hit the shelves, it just did not hold up how I remembered it. That's probably partly because my playthrough previously was back when the Wii was my primary console, so I was more used to somewhat blurry backgrounds, low resolution, and a low frame rate. Part of it, I think, though, is that it just hasn't aged well. Don't get me wrong, it is still a fantastic game that I thoroughly enjoyed replaying. I just didn't enjoy it as much as I expected to, and a lot of games from that console generation don't seem to have aged particularly well. Since the story is one of my favorite parts of it, knowing what happens already probably dampened some of my enjoyment, but I really can't stress enough how jarring that frame rate drop is when you enter battle, and how frustrating some of those pre-rendered backgrounds can be to navigate. Thankfully, this game is cheap, and it's playable on every piece of modern gaming hardware there is, and I do recommend giving it a play. It's okay if you don't finish it, it's not going to be for everybody with a game this old, and it's a solid 35 to 50 hour RPG depending on how much you grind and how many of the game's side quests you make a point to finish, but I firmly believe that any JRPG fan ought to experience at least Disc 1 of the game. My rating for Final Fantasy VII on PlayStation, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Switch, Android, iOS, and PC is a B.